Welcome, dear listeners, to Hermanas Healing Together, the podcast where we embark on a transformative journey of self-discovery, healing, and growth. I'm your host, Danny Moore, and I'm honored to guide you through insightful conversations that light the path to wellness. In each episode, we explore the profound stories of individuals who had traversed the winding roads of their own healing journey. Today, I am thrilled to introduce to you a remarkable person, Allison Shuck. She generously shares her tale of resilience and evolution, a captivating narrative that intertwines spirituality, personal growth, and her unique craft. Before we dive into Allison's profound experiences, a quick word of caution. This episode is intended for mature audiences as we delve into deep and sometimes challenging discussions. I also want to emphasize that Hermanas Healing Together is a safe space where we celebrate diverse paths, lifestyles, and journeys. My intention is to share and support, fostering a sense of unity and understanding among all who join us in this podcast. Without further ado, everyone, please welcome Allison Shuck. So tell me a little bit about you. I know that there is a lot, and we talked about that previously, but if you want to just fill us in as to how did you get into spirituality and like getting into all this witchiness?
It was a mix of curiosity and a long history within the family as well. Because I grew up around a lot of it with my mother in particular, and she had all sorts of spell books, stuff like that. Liked getting me involved with like checking out stuff like practical magic and all that kind of thing early on, which by the way is still just a fun, great movie. But she never necessarily pushed me too much towards it after a while because of the fact that she ended up going Buddhist. But and I had briefly apprenticed under somebody, well, I guess apprentice works. I had a mentor back when I was in high school though, and had a damn good pass at it. I didn't really get back into it though for a good, I want to say almost a decade, until I started having a whole bunch of other stuff happen, and they got a recommendation for a shop downtown, ended up going over there, and was briefly curious and happened to come across a deck I already liked a bit before that, and started getting into reading. Turned out to be really, really good at reading rather quickly, and started following along with that more and connecting with a couple of the other witches here in town, like in passing, and kind of started figuring myself out with that.
It's amazing. And I like sometimes how we can be so quick and good. Like I remember when I got into my path, I remember having a set of dreams that put me into reading the cards. And it was so interesting because never in my life did I think that I was going to do that, but it just kind of came into my journey. I don't know how to explain it. I can get like really in depth with it, and I'm not going to today, but it was just things and dreams and different stuff that happened to me before I fully jump into it. And like you said, I feel the same way. Like once I got into it, it clicked, and I was rather quick at learning. I feel like I do better with like oracle cards than tarot. With tarot, it's like it has to be specific decks, and they really have to speak to me. I have bought so many, and it's like when I start working with them, I'm just like, they don't resonate anymore, and then I end up selling them. And so, but with oracle cards, I feel like my connection is almost immediate to them. And so I find that interesting that you and I kind of share that, because I have come across other people who are also getting into this path, and I've kept it hidden for a long time. That still till this day, Allison, I still kind of struggle with like being fully comfortable talking about it, because I always say I'm an underground witch. Yeah, I keep it super hush hush because we do live in a community where it's not very widely accepted, and so I always say I'm an underground witch. But going back to what I was saying, it's like some people have asked me about it, and they're like, I just don't know, like where to start, what to research. And I said, what is the first thing that pops into your head that you really, really, truly enjoy when it comes to spirituality? And they will give me a word, and I said, start there. Go and venture and look into that and learn and research, and I promise you that it will just open the path to whatever you need to go with it and whatever you need to be doing with spiritual work. So, but I want to keep on hearing about your story, your healing journey. And 10 years, you said that?
Yeah, so back when I was in high school, I actually started working more with guides and guardians and stuff like that, and lucid dreaming a lot. And that was really interesting. The main reason I ended up dropping off from doing so much of it was the fact that, largely due to my own dumb pride as a teenager, and well, teenagers just do stupid things and rush ahead on things.
Right.
I did dumb stuff and got burned for it, and ended up kind of backing off, especially since my mentor and I ended up getting in a big argument about it, since they were somebody that was also like in high school with me, so it was a whole mess.
Yeah.
And then I ended up coming out here, and that's kind of where we're getting to the trauma stuff, because basically that whole 10-year gap had simultaneously a lot and nothing happened in a weird way. Because in my case, I had shifted from where I was at in high school and all that as my hometown to moving to a different town due to financial reasons. And then after only nearly hitting a year at that place where we moved to, we ended up having to move again. So I basically lost all of my connections and had to rebuild aside from who I had online. Now, mind you, I will say one of my favorite things I had, and kind of the thing that helped me get into a path of like having good discipline and stuff like that, was where we had moved to when we were still back in California, was where I got into taking martial arts again. And one of the things I really like about well-done martial arts is the fact that a lot of teachers don't believe in teaching you to fight. They believe in teaching you to defend yourself so you don't have to fight. And I had a teacher in particular who, he did not let people, if they were trying to fight out of a sense of ego or pride, he would not let them spar. Like, until you basically ate a slice of humble pie and just kind of chilled out, you were basically stuck training on your own. I mean, you'd still be training alongside others, but you weren't going to spar with anybody. Because for him, and it's one of the big things that I personally live as my life motto now, which is, or one of my main life mottos I have now, is that there's no point in comparing yourself to others to a certain degree, because if you try to constantly go after where others are at, then you're never going to be truly satisfied with where you are. But if you always try to be better than the person who you were the day before, or at least in your past, you have the ability to take a step back, look behind you, and see how far you've come, and actually feel a better sense of pride and fulfillment in how much you've done.
That's beautiful. I like that. We tend to do that a lot. We tend to compare ourselves to other people, and I think a lot of us can get lost in that, but I think you put that very beautifully. And so what are some of the things that you would like to share with us today and our listeners about your healing?
So dealing with the online circles in and of itself was honestly kind of fun. Had a bunch of stuff go on with that, but the main thing that started a lot of the chaos with me was the fact that I'm actually an emotional and almost physical abuse victim. And what happened in my case was I had gotten in a relationship with somebody who, at the time, neither of us were inquiring, neither of us knew that she was pregnant from a one-night stand. And so what happened was the fact that we both had feelings about it, and we still had feelings for each other, and we're like, all right, fine, we'll go ahead and try to make this happen, because it sounds like the dad's not going to want to be around, and we're like, okay, well, if he's not going to be around, we'll see what we can do. And I guess for context too, my voice is usually well trained, so it doesn't give it away, but I am trans. And so this was back when I was actually still a guy. I was kind of trained to I was kind of taking up that mantle of, okay, well, I can be the father and whatnot with this kid. And so we went with that. The problem was, as time went on, she started showing more and more habits of emotional abuse and narcissism that I honestly wasn't picking up on, because she started isolating me from a lot of my friends, trying to say, well, I don't like what this friend is saying, you should get rid of them, or stuff like that, so on and so forth. Or if I had bad stuff happen on my end, she would basically just kind of try to one-up it and oftentimes make up her own thing about it in order to put the attention back on her. Like, I think my ultimate example of that was, I had one night when I dang near died because of the fact that we had a whole carbon monoxide issue happening at our house. And so that was a whole panic. Had the fire department come out, stuff like that. And because I was still asleep, somebody else noticed it. I think either the dogs alerted off to somebody or something like that, that there was something going on. Which, again, one of the other reasons having animals around is amazing, because they notice that and will usually wake you up. But, so that all happened. I'm recovering from that, only for her to then go, oh, hey, by the way, there's now my abuser, or my ex-abuser at my door, constant, and so on and so forth. Basically saying their ex-abuser had stalked her down, stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, well, shoot, let's help you with that and get out of my own issue. Only for me to have found out months later that that was a lie, and she was just trying to shift the focus onto her. And so what ended up happening there was, eventually we ended up getting actually to be together more in person and whatnot. And it was interesting, because at that point we'd kind of gotten into a weird state of arguments, and where she's like, well, we're not necessarily together, we're going to try seeing other people and type of thing, especially since the new guy wants to kind of maybe see about helping out. And I'm like, all right, fine, we'll see what we can do. I was still younger and a bit more naive about the kind of thing, and just didn't take a step away, especially since I'd been decently involved already, because of the fact that she was a high-risk pregnancy and we had done a lot. And that's one of the things I've mentioned, and that's one of the things that I actually have a better perspective on, is I went through the whole keeping up with, I usually kept up like a week ahead of what to expect on when she was pregnant. We had the usual fears and stuff of, why hasn't the baby kicked for like 6 hours, until finally we got a kick, stuff like that. And so eventually, once we're actually together some more, I end up getting to hang out with the kid some. Kid absolutely loved me, was all over me, oftentimes reached for me to hold on to her, all that. Would cuddle up with her, she was bouncing on my knee, that kind of thing. And that was all fun and good. The problem was when she saw that I had actually taken actively to, hey, we can see other people, because she had looked through my phone a bit. She basically decided to, and I'm going to just put an abuse warning here for anybody, to hold me down and put a lighter to my hair and basically pin me down in place, and also threaten to carve her initials into me.
Wow.
And so after that, that certainly put me into a certain headspace. And after processing things for a while, I realized that I needed to get out of there, and kind of had this weird debacle of, do I stay there for the kid to help out, or do I leave while the kid can't remember me, so that they have a chance to get brought up in a healthier household where they're not going to pick up the trauma of parents that are constantly at each other's throat.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose to do the more mature option at the time, well, mature option in general, which was, I put the kid ahead of myself and said, look, she can support herself, she has a support network, I just need to leave before the kid can remember me, so she has a chance to let the kid grow up in a more positive household, because whatever's going on with our abuse, with the abuse, is not going to be a good thing for the kid to be raised around.
Right.
And this turned to me basically never being allowed to see the child again, and not being given any updates or anything. And that's been about 5 or 6 years now. So I tell people I used to be a parent, but I'm not anymore.
How old was that child when you left?
Not even 1.
Young. Wow.
So that was a whole ride.
And do you know anything about this person now and how they're doing, and maybe with their mental health, how they're doing?
Every now and then I check up on her Facebook. I'm not friends with her anymore, but she seems to be doing well. So
That's good. That's good. That sounds pretty heavy. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. Thanks for sharing. And what happens then after this? I know now your future wife is it future wife? Is it wife now?
we call she jokingly likes to be called husband a lot of times because she acts more like a guy half the time.
I love that.
And so we jokingly say that she's the husband, I'm the wife, and
Okay.
so hence even down to me taking her last name.
Yes.
And so so that kind of leads into a couple of things, which was after that I kind of had a whole long stretch of depression of not doing much, because depression just be like that, and sometimes you just go full hibernate mode for a while.
Right.
And ended up being in a couple other relationships along that time, which were mostly like kind of light, more light, more superficial, a couple months here, a couple months there kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, she's like the only ex I left off on bad terms with, because I'm actually really good at usually breaking up on really nice terms with a lot of people, since most of the time I can recognize, look, it's neither of us, it's usually more, hey, look, we're just at different points, so we can kind of go, we're at different points in our lives, certain things aren't lining up, maybe we should just not do this.
And they take it well, because
A lot of times
that's
a
great ability to have.
A lot of times they usually do, since I was able to pick up on what they're talking about, since even with a lot of the bad stuff that happened during the abuse, there was a couple of good lessons I learned, which is, and one that I personally think a lot of people should, actually there's two lessons I think a lot of people should learn to make their relationships last better and hold up longer, is one, most arguments and stuff like that, even if they feel superficial, are usually coming from some place of truth. So sometimes you just have to take a step back and go, all right, this was the heat of the moment, this was the heat of the moment, but what sparked this to cause the fire to show up in the first place?
Right.
And secondly, with my fiance and I, we have a rule, which is we never go to bed without, with something kind of sitting between us argument-wise. And so we'll usually, no matter how uncomfortable it is, take the time to talk things out before we fall asleep. Because in my case, I have a personal simile that I use a lot for relationships, which is the fact that a relationship is like a garden. It's one of those things that you go into thinking you're going to only be fostering maybe one or two things, but next thing you know, you have you have another plant here, some flowers that you take certain elements of care, other ones that take certain other types of care, but most importantly, and it takes a while to build up. It's a lot. It can be beautiful. It can at times be really durable, but also very fragile. But most importantly, that a lot of arguments start from weeds that nobody picks out, that nobody plucks before they get into everything else.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, let's represent part of your love life or going out on dates and stuff like that as a plant, as a flower here. You might be arguing about a date that's gone bad for some stupid reason about oh, I don't like this type of food or something like that. That'd normally be a regular relationship argument that gets extra heated, only for you to realize it was a weed from an argument you had a couple months back that never got picked up and just kind of worked itself out into something and worked itself into something else.
Yeah.
So I'm a very firm believer in nipping things in the bud early, since it sounds difficult, but honestly, it's much harder to get rid of it later and much more taxing to get rid of it later. And a lot of times, if you try to nip it in the bud early and you can just kind of swallow your pride, you realize, oh, hey, it was just a really dumb little misunderstanding. Or, oh, hey, maybe I should have just listened to this a bit better. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear when it comes to making their relationships stay strong.
Yeah, I think that a lot of relationships, there's a lot of, I'm going to hint at you and maybe you'll pick on what I'm trying to say instead of being forward with it. But I think that also stems from people's experiences and maybe traumas that they just feel like, oh, if I talk and I open up, maybe I'm too vulnerable. Or maybe, in my case, I felt this way before, because I always say I have a voice and I'm going to use it. And this is the reason why I also do this podcast, because it allows me to use my voice for something awesome. But I have seen myself sometimes as someone like, oh, maybe I'm just being nagging, maybe I'm just being too much, maybe I'm just asking for too much, maybe I shouldn't just everything that comes to my head, that I need to talk about it. But in all honesty, Allison, for me especially, if I don't tell you what I feel and I keep it to myself, it's going to bother me, and that it's going to turn on an issue for me of anger and resentment.
Yeah.
So I've learned to use my voice, but not only that, then I have to learn how to nicely say things, because I will say things and I'll be so upfront that sometimes it was coming out a little harsh. And so I kind of had to train myself to do that, but I say I can't let it sit with me, because if I let it sit with me, it bothers me. And I always make sure that I tell the person, I'm saying this with love and respect. I kind of like to put that tone, because sometimes my voice is not soft and sweet.
Yeah.
So it's like just one of those things, but it's I really admire that from you. I have to say, I really like hearing how you handle that. I think that's beautiful. And I think we need to be a little bit more aware and thoughtful and mindful of the feelings. Being in a relationship is so vulnerable. I personally have been away from relationships for 7 years. That connection for me is just not there. I feel too vulnerable when I get in. And I know that I have to do personal work with that. But at the same time, I feel like I'm in a place where I'm totally okay with that. And I say, I'm doing the work in the background, and whenever I'm ready to be in a loving relationship again, then I will open myself for that. But I've been kind of hidden from that world for about 7 years.
Fair enough.
And so, yeah. So I want to talk about the spirituality, because that's like music to my ears. Mm-hmm. What do you do? What do you enjoy? What is your path?
Well, my path is largely one of, in terms of what I focus on, I do a combination of, I started with cards, but I also do some stuff with candles. I do some stuff with candles, do some spell work, and do a lot of, and I do a decent bit of sigil work as well. Mm-hmm. And kind of combine those together. I'm trying to work more with moon phases and stuff like that too. Mm-hmm. I just sometimes lose track of it, honestly, with everything else going on with life. But no, with me, lucid dreaming especially is part of it, and working with guides is part of it. But so I'm personally, my patron's actually Lilith in particular.
Okay, yeah.
Who is a honestly fascinating goddess to get into a lot of times, since when it comes to her, and there's actually a long family history, it seems, with. Part of the reason why I got tattoo of her sigil is because of the fact I took the time to dive into family history, and I found out that my family history is not only matriarchal, but also very often a lot of women getting screwed over by others. Mm-hmm. But so here's the thing with Lilith in terms of concepts, though, is that a lot of her older representations and stuff like that was not only as like the first woman, but basically being born from clay and filth and stuff like that. And there's something kind of interesting to really look into with that, which is, and it's kind of the one thing I went into this year with, which was let myself have room to kind of treat myself like that clay and transform into who I want to be, and also recognize where that filth is. And that's one of the big things with working with her, is with her, a huge thing with her is shadow work, and especially in terms of preconceived notions. Because a lot of times we don't realize how many preconceived notions that we have until we really are made to face them. And it's really difficult, because heck, even the concept with her, there's people who see her as a demon, people who see her as a queen of succubi, stuff like that, and all that. But a lot of times it's in the case of facing your preconceived notions of what is strong, what is weak, what is what's with the paradox of the fact that the strongest people are the ones who are willing to be weak to those that are around them. Because that's one of the weirder paradoxes of life, is the fact that oftentimes the weakest people are oftentimes the ones that don't, how should I put this? There's an element of weakness to not letting others support you, whereas there's an element of strength to being able to let yourself be weak around others, because then they can take on some of the burden and let you improve yourself and grow. And that's kind of the same concept of getting rid of like the old filth and stuff like that, and growing was, this year has been a lot of me throwing out old notions I've had about myself and others to a degree, where I kind of just took a step back and said, I'm just going to go into most things without actually having a notion. I'm just going to kind of let things be as they are. That way I'm always pleasantly, maybe unpleasantly surprised, but that way I'm never setting myself up for failure by going, well, this didn't go how I wanted to, and stuff like that. Especially with like reclaiming sexuality, and especially with like reclaiming sexuality and things like that too.
So working with her, I don't know much about her. I know of her. What are like some of the things that she enjoys? Or, well, I have two questions. I'm gonna put them all together.
Yeah.
But like in your healing journey, that's what I want to know first. Like in your healing journey, how does she help you in your healing journey?
Yeah.
And how does she assist, or how do you work with her to get there, or to?
Well, working with the healing journey, and this kind of works into a couple of things too with notions, which is that from a psychological standpoint, the very concept of how trauma affects the brain is if you view the brain as a camera, then trauma is a lens. It basically puts a lens of what you need to expect to have happen as a safety measure over what your brain is seeing, and that's what directly affects it. And that's one of the things that people don't get when they say like, well, why don't you just get over it and stuff like that, is it's not necessarily that. It's your brain creates that lens to basically keep itself safe, and a lot of times you don't realize that's what it's doing. And in my case, and this actually is something that Cassie and I both worked on a lot. I'm not going to tell her story or anything, but her and I both came out of having toxic, abusive relationships in the past. And one of the things that people do not tell you about dealing with that kind of history is toxic relationships are addictive. Because it's because of the fact that you get so used to the highs and lows that effectively you get so used to having the really rough lows of arguments and abuse that when things are nice, it's such a nice high that you're willing to ignore it, kind of like a drug. Mm-hmm. And that's when you get into positive relationships that are healthy, you don't really have those big highs and big lows. You have a certain level of moderate contentment that fluctuates here and there. And if you're used to abusive relationships, it's very easy to try to self-sabotage it to where you create those lows so you can have those highs later. Because you almost have to effectively rehabilitate your brain to go, hey, look, what you're doing is trying to sabotage me so that we end up having an argument to feel better about later. Don't do that. And that is not easy to break. It took us a while to get there. And when it came to dealing with the actual healing elements of it too, I realized there was more of those like lenses there than I thought there was initially, especially towards me in the bedroom, like kind of switching around roles and whatnot, which was, I honestly am somebody that enjoys being towards like the bottom side of things and a bit more submissive a lot of times. And so I had really weird barriers around that though, and I could not figure out what it was for the longest time until I realized that it was a weird mix. And so I started doing more shadow work and stuff like that, and realized that it wasn't necessarily so much about being worried about my partner so much as it was sitting there wondering if I deserved to just not have to do as much, or to just be able to relax and enjoy something. Because it wasn't even a sense of shame, because I initially tried to think, well, maybe it's a sense of shame about something. But once that was gone, I was left with a gigantic, what's going on here? And it was a weird sense of guilt, if anything, because I was telling myself, oh, well, because you had this and this happen to you, and because you've done this, and because this has happened to you, then you feel like then I feel like I don't necessarily deserve to have what I want. I should be able to please others, but as one of my friends told me, like, he basically looked at me and said, I don't know what's going on, but everybody else is trying to help you. At this point, you're just torturing yourself. And that kind of helped click a lot of things into place for me to look at it, and I realized that a lot of what was going on was having to take the time to really reconcile with the old parts of myself that were hurting and still feeling like they deserved to be going through all of that.
Right. And in hypnosis, we call that, it's not programming. We program ourselves through our experiences and through the things that we even say to ourselves. Was it you that told me that you tried hypnosis before?
Yes, I have. I actually really like hypnosis.
How was that experience?
Good. So in my case, it was give me one moment.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Just taking a little sip of water. That's what I was doing earlier too.
So with me, I've worked with hypnosis a couple times. One was early on in my transition to kind of help me get more comfortable in myself, and I don't remember too much from all that, but it definitely was a nice way to shift into things. But the more recent one to talk about that's actually really worth noting was, I have an old friend of mine that her and I really kind of split off for a while on bad's not the right way to phrase the terms, but basically it was when I was still earlier on in my healing end of things. I kind of realized the fact that she had a lot of same issues I was having, and I'm a very avoidant person much of the time in general. And so seeing the fact that I often saw how I was seeing my stuff mirrored in her, and it made me feel super, super uncomfortable. And so I decided to step back and kind of run off for a while. And it was really weird looking back too, because when she actually was like, hey, I was never necessarily mad at you. I was hurt, but I was more worried about you more than anything else. And I'm like, huh. And so I took the time to look back. And so one of the times that she actually put me under, she really just took the time to go, I've forgiven you, now we need to work on you forgiving yourself. Because she really just sat there, kept me under, and just was like, I've forgiven you, and you've made amends. You've done what you can to make better for it. We're back on speaking terms. We're back to being close. What do you have to sit there beating yourself up about? And kind of broke that off from me, and it honestly helped a ton.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Would you be open to talking about your transition and how, what was positive about it, what negative things have you dealt with and or are currently dealing with?
Oh, absolutely. I don't mind.
Sure. I would love to hear about that. Because experiences being part of the LGBTQIA plus community sometimes are a little rough for some people, for the majority of people, especially for a trans woman or someone that, identifies differently from what the norm, quote unquote, is.
Yeah.
And I'm part of the community too. I consider myself a pansexual person. And I always, since I can remember, I always refer to myself as us, we. So I'm two-spirit. It's what I say. I'm both. I feel both women and female and male, and so, yeah. But I don't think, or I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to think the right words to say. I guess I've been privileged to not experience what others have experienced in their journey being part of the community. So talk to me about that. Like, what has been the experience?
So one of the main things to bring up with it in particular that kind of will put a lens that's honestly worth noting, especially with a lot of other elements to it, is the fact that and a lot of people don't know this, I don't think you even knew about this actually, is I'm autistic.
I kind of got a sense because I have an autistic kid, but I also want to say that you mentioned this last time we were together when we all met at Pine and Plow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I actually am autistic, which surprises a lot of people because I'm very good at masking it. And
Totally, I would say.
I'm usually very good at masking it.
Can I say what gives it away for
What?
me as a mom of a kid with autism?
What?
The lack of eye contact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a switch I can flip, but that's a whole other story to get into in terms of dealing with us because, So, getting further into stuff with the transition, there is a amount of dealing with the autism that tied to it where you kind of have, and it was something that kind of really started as early as high school, where there was a situation of, well, there was an element of never really being able to fit in due to the fact that we were picking up on social cues from both guys and girls around us.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, because of the fact that we couldn't really do them correctly, we got really used to people watching and started doing both of them. Mm-hmm. But high schoolers are rude, and so we got bullied for not being able to fit in particularly with either side, because this was still back in the
90s?
Late 2000s.
2000s? You're younger than me. How old are you?
I am turning 30 this year.
Oh, you're so, yeah, I'm 39. That's why I was saying 90s.
But so, getting into that though, we actually, it was one of those weird situations where after high school and whatnot, we sat there trying to figure ourselves out, trying to figure out what made us comfortable, because we honestly were pretty handsome, but a lot of times we just couldn't find a look or things that made us feel comfortable. We would try repeatedly different types of clothes, different types of hairstyles, different types of facial hair, all that. And no matter what we tried, nothing ever felt right, nothing ever felt comfortable. And then we had the passing thoughts here and there of wanting to be a woman. And we actually expressed ourselves a lot through writing too, where we were dealing with, there, I got myself away with the weed. Oops. So, well, the whole other barrel of monkeys to get into later is I also have dissociative identity disorder. So that's a whole other barrel.
What is it? Explain that to me.
Multiple personalities.
Got it.
So getting into that though, one of the main ways that there was representation for us online was dealing with writing. And we had characters that were feminine enough and accurately feminine enough that we were attracting like actual lesbians that were curious about them and stuff like that, mm-hmm. in terms of how well they were written, in terms of the emotional spectrum and stuff like that. Because for the longest time we had a blind spot to it since we didn't really have our dad around whatsoever when we were growing up. Mm-hmm. However, we were always around mom. And so we were used to kind of being around that feminine energy, being used to kind of accepting emotions and processing them and being more in touch with that kind of side of ourselves. So for the longest time, we were like, oh, well, it's not necessarily maybe a trans thing, more of a just we're in touch with our emotions kind of thing. But then what happened then around 2019 is when we had our final real like thunderbolt, like our lightning strike moment where we came across a friend of ours on Facebook and we're like, oh, hey, we don't recognize this person. The last name seems familiar. And we realized it was actually somebody we went to high school with that transitioned and had been trans for a while.
Wow. And
we're like, oh, hey, so that's just a thing we can do. And this is one of the reasons why I am a strong believer in representation being so important. Absolutely. Is because for me, growing up, there wasn't really positive representation of trans people whatsoever. Most representation of trans people back even like the late 2000s was usually either as drag queens or as the butt of a joke. And so right. There's no real positive elements there to really associate with and go, oh, hey, maybe this is what I am. And so when I came across it as just somebody being, I'm like, oh, hey, that's actually really, really cool. And decided to explore that side of me gradually until, well, of course, COVID and all that happened. But in the midst of all that happening as well, I ended up actually getting some psych appointments scheduled and stuff like that. And this is the big thing that a lot of people who try to be like transphobic and whatnot don't get about when they say, well, you're just sick and should get help.
Right, it's a mental disorder.
literal trained psychological professional said gender identity dysphoria. As such, let her be a woman because that's going to be what treats it. They don't understand that being trans is the treatment to the very thing they're saying is a sickness. Like, the psychologists are on our side, not y'all's. The transphobic people that try to be against that are so odd to me.
Yeah.
But, mostly because, and I get why, it's usually a point of ignorance and they don't get the information from the best people. But, so we got all that psych evaluation and stuff like that done back in mid-2020. And eventually came out to the parents because they kept on pushing, like, why are you going to therapy? Why are you going to therapy? And I'll be the first to admit I cannot lie to save my life when it comes to my mom because she'll just see right through me most of the time.
That's my mom, and I always tell her, Mom, you know, you're a witch. and she's like, yes.
And so I came out to them about all of that and like, oh, well, okay. And it's been a whole element to get to a good place with them about it, but...
So were they not accepting of it at the beginning, or somewhat?
It was a mix of things. They were confused, not sure how to handle themselves, and grieving in their own way, which is... It's one of those weird cases where there's two sides to it, and both sides are valid, so it kind of makes everybody suck.
Right.
It's when you come out like that after a certain while, there is the side of one person wanting to be really happy and go, why aren't you happy for me finding my happiness? But you also have to acknowledge that, especially for a parent, they're like, well, I had this expectation for you for, like, in my case, a quarter of a century, so it's a lot to process. And at the time, I had a harder time accepting that, but it very much is a thing, especially since a lot of times they were more worried about my safety and health and stuff like that, being in a more conservative area. But
yes,
it eventually all came to a head back when I was around, because I couldn't really still couldn't really experiment and be who I wanted to be outside of my room for a while, even after that, until it all came to a head at the end of 2020. And I effectively said, well, the only way this is going to really get handled or treated well is that sometimes distance is the best way to heal things. And so I ended up moving out. I used most of my savings to move out, at which point I'm like, all right, that way I can live on my own, be who I want to be, and we're going to have our distance between each other to kind of cool things off.
Right. And
allow room to kind of process things and let them come to accept me as my happier side and who I am. And it worked out in the long run. I'm still on good terms with my parents, generally speaking.
That's good. That's good. Something that I have always told my kids is like, I don't care what you decide to be later on. I said, as long as you're a good person, know that I will always support you. Some of us are laid into accepting who we are.
Yeah.
I grew up in a conservative family. And I will say that even though my family is conservative, there's a lot of openness and they're very open-minded to things. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I could say this to my my siblings. Yes. My mom took me a little while. But, as children, we all want to be accepted, regardless. We want to feel like we fit in, validated, Maybe not fit in, but validated. For me, it's more important than they accepting or,
Yeah.
I want to feel validated by them. But, there's just a lot of, and this is a reminder to those who are listening that my podcast is about being open. It's about sharing different experiences. Just giving us a voice to explain our concepts and different concepts that a lot of people may not understand. And so I just ask that you have an open mind and an open heart with the things that we're speaking about in here today. But a lot of the things I personally feel that it's just a way that we have been, or people have been brought up to believe.
Yeah.
Like in my country, somebody that wants to be trans, they will receive public hate. That happens here too, but I've seen it over there in a way that seems violent.
Yeah.
And it puts people at risk. Bottom line, we are all people, we're all human beings, we all have feelings, and we should be free to express ourselves and be ourselves regardless.
Exactly. And here's the thing too that's worth noting, is because one of the main things that seems to show up a lot with a lot of people like getting on trans people's cases is there's a lot of misinformation in particular. And for one of the best examples of this that always catches a lot of people I talk to off guard. I've been on hormones for, let's see, I think, I know this month makes 3 years. And so there's a couple of elements to it. Like my voice being like this, I actually had to train it to be this high and in this more soft of a feminine tone most of the time. And that's because in my case, it actually didn't affect my vocal cords at all. So I had to actively take the time to adjust it and make it sound the way it is instead. And not only that, but with the hormones, and something that threw off a lot of my coworkers for a time, because I'm not going to spend anything about like other previous jobs, but I will say is I had a job that was more physical for a while, and within like the first month and a half of taking more hormones, I lost like half of my physical body strength. And so a lot of coworkers were like, why do you need so much more help, like opening the big tray or doors and stuff like that, or moving pallets? And I'm like, it's because I lost like half of my physical strength. I don't want to be this weak, but here I am.
Right. And that happens. And I've heard other experiences too with hormone therapy that happens for a lot of those who are transitioning. But even comments like that, I feel like they're not polite. It's like there are certain things I can control, you know.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with hormone therapy, but you know, I went through a phase where I was in chronic pain, and I was, you know, before that able to do CrossFit and work out 4 or 5 times a week, and I felt like on top of the world, to the point where I had no desire to do anything because I was just hurting, right?
Yeah.
And I think it would have really hurt my feelings if somebody would have been like, oh, but just get up and work out. You know, if somebody would have been saying that to me, I think I would have probably gotten upset with them, because it's like, whatever this is, and I gained like 25 pounds when I was going through all of this. So on top of not having the energy to exercise, I mean, I tried. I felt I would go to the park and walk, but then I felt so in pain by the time I was coming back that I didn't want to do it. It was just not worth putting my body through it. But because I like to eat, I ended up putting on like 25 pounds. And I think if I would have had somebody tell me, oh, but just go work out. Oh, but just, you know, diet. Oh, but just, you know, I probably would have not taken that in a very nice way.
Yeah.
And it's like, allow me to be in my experience for whatever this is. I'm out of that. I feel much better. Occasionally, I still struggle with like, do I really need to? I'm stiff. Didn't I tell you this morning? I feel so stiff. My hips are hurting.
I hear you. That's my fiance actually has fibromyalgia and chronic pain issues. So
sometimes I feel that I have that. I just don't want to know.
No, I hear that. And so in my case, it's I actively do help her out by like giving her massages here and there, because especially with that, the pain causes so much extra muscle tension. So it's not uncommon for me to give her a couple of massages a week in order to keep her up and running. And it usually helps out.
Yeah.
So.
You know, in my experience, which is different for everybody, I have come to figure out that there are certain foods that will trigger that for me. And then if I don't consume them, I am for the most part okay, but it's usually junk food, and I do like junk food here and there, but it's like if I eat it, I know the shoulder chronic pain is gonna come to the surface, and it's like sometimes the craving wings.
Oh, trust me, I have acid reflux. You're preaching to the choir.
I deal with that too.
I have acid reflux, and I grew up in California, where there was always really good Mexican food. Trust me.
The spicy food. Is that what affects you? The spice.
Right?
Oh yeah.
I'm like, do I feel like suffering from spicy food, or do I feel like dealing with having what I want?
Oh no, I get it 100%. I'm there with you on that, because that's exactly my problem. I like spicy food, and I pay the price if I eat it.
You know, I love spicy food, and I'm like, well, I know I'm going to be having Tums basically all night tonight,
Right.
but I don't care.
Right, exactly. It's like we're just ready, right? But no, acid reflux that's tough sometimes when I'm I don't like it when it's in the middle of the night and you're having all of that. It's like, oh. But I just discovered a new remedy. My aunt actually gave this to me when I was in Miami. It was it's water with a little bit of baking soda, and not the regular baking soda, but this is Bob's Red Mills, I think it is. Like a $4 and something baking soda. And you just put like half a teaspoon or maybe a little bit less, and mix it in water and sip it, and it will balance the acid in your stomach. Like it works like a charm. Maybe it's in my head, but I'm okay with that. Even if it's just in my head, it still works out for me. So is there anything else you would like to add today before we wrap it up?
Trying to think. Because especially with some of my craft stuff, that could seem like more not safe for work territory, so I was trying to avoid getting into that more.
Yeah. Well, I want you to be comfortable and just be open to speaking to what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, no. Because I'm open to talking to them. It's just certain elements of my craft also involve stuff like sex, magic, and whatnot, which I know is a bit more of a weird taboo for some people to talk about.
Oh, yeah. No, I've heard of that. And there's people that use that for manifestation, and it works really well for them. Yeah, I'm really open to it.
It works great for me, especially with some of the spells I've done. Like, it's crazy just how well it works for me a lot of times.
What's your favorite spell work to do? Do you have a favorite one?
Let's see.
Or what is it that you like when it comes to magic?
So a lot of times what I do, I would personally say I'm very much used to doing a combination of like making the jars and also enchanting stuff.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the pendant I have on all the time, and I'll let you feel it after this too. Well, excuse me a second.
Oh.
Not this one. This one. You want to feel it?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, sorry, I shocked you. Oh, that's pretty.
But yeah,
Those are pretty.
So with me, I do a combination of things to a point that I have been jokingly told by. I think you've had Lauren on here before too, which was I've been jokingly told that I have a lack of moderation much of the time when it comes to my stuff. So a lot of times,
being too open about speaking about your
experiences? No, a lack of moderation in my craft.
Oh,
because what will happen is, like, a lot of times I'll usually make my full sigil grid, and then have the cards laid. Because with me in tarot, what you can do is you can kind of almost actually use your cards as focal points for what you want the spells to involve. Mm-hmm. So I'll usually use my sigil grid for basically the rules of the spell. I'll set the cards as focal points and stuff like that. And then usually have my candles up. Like, I'll have my elemental candles out, and then I'll usually have the actual intention candles out. And then also can work with evocation, so I'll work that into things too every now and then. And then tend to do stuff in a way that either involves sharing the spirit or just basically kind of focusing something in on a piece of jewelry I always wear as effectively if I always... So it depends. Like, if it's a spell for myself... Because I openly say I don't do anything that affects I don't do anything directly targeted unless I have 100% consent to do so, which I did I made a spell bag for my fiance at one point to help her find her current job, for example. But, and that worked out great. But most of the time I'll put it on stuff like jewelry that I wear, or on, like, basically I'll make little spell jars that I'll then keep wrapped up nice and tight and keep on me at all times. Stuff like that. So basically, so long as it's next to me or with me, it's always active. And so that's my usual stuff I work with.
That's awesome. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing. This has been great. It's been so awesome having you. Maybe I'll have your fiance join me too one day. But I wanna thank you guys for listening and being here with us and sharing this awesome moment. Allison sharing her story, being open about her practice. And just, I think it's amazing as a trans woman, everything that she's sharing with us today. I was excited. I don't know. I just get excited. When you mentioned actually drag queens, I always wanted to do drag.
Yeah.
like drag makeup. That's always been my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I do my makeup, it's really, the eyes are usually pretty bold because, you know, it kind of represents like a smaller version of what drag would be. But at some point in my life, I probably will get into that.
Well, people don't realize drag kings are a thing too. Absolutely.
Totally. Yes. But when you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, I've always loved drags. I went to a show in Miami, matter of fact, one time, and I had the best time of my life. It was amazing. But anyways, just want to thank you again for being here. And for those that are listening, you can connect with me. I just opened that new Instagram that you can go find. Everything about this podcast is on Instagram, like I said, at Hermanas Healing Together. And such an honor again, Allison, to have you here with me. And thank you guys for tuning in, sending you love, healing, happiness, and all the good things. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.